So let's start to set up some forms and to set up what questions and data we want to collect by clicking on the Forms tab and then either Create New Form or plus here. Once we come in here, we're going to be given an option to choose from a template, a blank form, or from a list of pre-selected templates, which will hopefully be a helpful starting point. Just for the sake of learning though, we're going to start with a blank form to start with. So the first thing we're going to notice here is this reminder that we're not allowed to capture any information regarding Johnny's smoking habits. Thank you very much for that. And our first question is the form label. This is just going to be for our eyes only. What do we want to call this form? So let's call this, let's say we're going to track physical aggression. And our next question here is the question itself. So this is the question that we are going to be asking staff to answer. So the question here is, did Johnny engage in physical aggression during this shift? Fantastic. Our next question here is required. Do we want this form, do we want to set it up so that staff have to complete this form every time, or is this going to be optional? Johnny may not engage in physical aggression during a shift, so I am going to leave the required field to be blank. Our next question here is, should this be repeatable? Should staff be able to complete this form once per shift, or should staff be able to complete this form many times per shift? Now, once again, because Johnny, he could engage in multiple instances of physical aggression during a shift, so I'm going to leave this as repeatable so they can repeat this. Our next question here is a default form. If we like this form and if we want to reuse this form with other clients, we can check this box, and then later on, when we come to create a new form, this will come up as one of the options for us. So let's leave that checked here. And our last question here is restrictive practice. Is this form reporting the use of a restrictive practice? The key thing that checking this box is going to do is that there's a special report that we can generate, which is just going to capture all of the restrictive practices. And so by checking this form, we're telling the system that this needs to be reported specially. Johnny using physical aggression is not a restrictive practice though, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. Our next section here is about the scheduling of this form. So here we see a list of all of the shifts that Johnny has, and this is just asking, do we want this form to be asked for this given shift or not? So for instance, if this were collecting information about community access, maybe Johnny never goes into the community at night, so it wouldn't make sense to ask that question then, so I would uncheck that. Johnny, however, can engage in physical aggression at morning, afternoon, or night, so I'm going to leave all of those checked there. Our next question here is whether this form is active or not. Forms are by default always going to be turned on as active. The purpose of this field is if I've been asking this question for, let's say, 6 months, and it turns out that Johnny hasn't engaged in any physical aggression for the past 3 months, and I no longer need to be asking this form. If I uncheck this, it will no longer be asked of any staff, but it will still exist, which means that I can turn it back on, and I can also still access the data and the charts that I did collect. So this can be a handy field for that. And our last field in this section is for the expiry date. I can set a future date, and at that date, the form will automatically be set to inactive, so it will stop collecting data. So for instance, with a form like this, I could say I only need to collect 1 month's worth of data for this form. This would be a good way to set a date in the future where this will automatically be marked as inactive. And we have a field for advanced scheduling here, but I'm going to come back to this because this will make sense later on. Our next section here is the questions. So one client can have many forms and one form will have many questions. And this is where we start to write these questions. The first, similarly to before, this is the question label. What do we want to call this form in the system, this question in the system? Our next field here is for the question itself. So what is the question we actually want to ask the staff? Our next field here is for the question type or the data type. What is the type of information that we want to collect in this? What is this question asking for? Active, which once again is similarly, if we turn this off, this question will no longer be asked, but we will continue to retain all the data we have collected. And our last checkbox here is this required or not? Is this a mandatory question to ask? We can delete questions by clicking there. We can add new questions by clicking there. So now let's start to actually create some questions for this form. The first question, I'm going to be asking whether there was any injury caused as a result of this physical aggression. Was anyone physically injured? And the question type I want this to be, this is a simple yes or no, so I'm going to leave this on a checkbox. Is it active? Is it required? Yes, it is. There we go. I'm happy with that. The next question I want to ask is, if there was physical injury, I always find it really helpful to get a photo of that physical injury. So the label of this is going to be injury photo. And I'm going to say here, if there was physical injury, take a photo. The question type here is going to be image upload. They will be able to take a photo and upload that to the system. I do want this active. I don't want this to be required though, because if there wasn't any injury, they don't need to upload a photo. So I'm going to uncheck that. That's going to be an optional question. Let's look at the next question here. This is a bit of a subjective one, but it can be handy. Let's just talk about severity. How severe was the incident where 1 is low and 5 is high? Fantastic. The type of information I'm going to collect here is a linear scale. It is going to be a mandatory question. You'll see now that I've selected linear scale, this edit button has popped up here. So let's click on that and see what that does. This allows us to set the parameters of the question itself. So what is in this scaling question, what is the minimum value going to be? I can set it to be whatever I want. What is the default and what is the maximum? I said 1 for the lowest, 5 for the highest, so I'm actually pretty happy with those defaults. I'm going to stick with that for now. For our next form, I want to capture what the specific behaviours were that Johnny engaged in this incident. So I'm going to say, what behaviours did Johnny engage? Let's say do. It's a bit more simple English. The data type I'm going to choose here is going to be multiple choice. Once again, an edit box has popped up, so I'm going to click and see what that does. So this is going to be a drop-down box, essentially, with pre-populated fields that the staff are going to be able to enter themselves. There's a couple of questions first, though. Do I want to allow staff to enter new values of their own, or do I want them to only be able to choose from values that I myself have entered? There's a real trade-off here. It can be fantastic getting new data from your staff member. It's so beautiful. But on the other hand, you are also going to get a lot of junk that you'll then have to sort through double ups or people saying no or something like this. So this can be a mixed blessing, but it is really great to get new information at the beginning. So for now, I am going to leave that as checked. And our next question here is, should we allow staff to choose multiple values? This is going to be a drop down, like I say. Can they choose multiple options or can they only choose one? Johnny could engage in multiple different behaviors during an incident for sure, so I am going to check that. I'm going to add a few values here as well. What are the behaviors Johnny may engage in? Head banging, he may throw his shoes, and he may pull staff by their hair. There we go. I am happy with that now. What do we want to capture next? What about duration of the escalation or of the incident? Let's say, how long did the incident last? And I always think it's important to specify our units there. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'll say minutes. Once again, there's an edit button. So this again gives us the minimum, the default, and the maximum. And you know what, 180, that would be 3 hours if that were minutes. I'm actually pretty happy with those values, so I'm going to leave those as is. What question should we add next? For an incident like this, it can be helpful just to have a pure notes field. So I'm just going to say additional notes where they can write whatever it is they want to write, whatever that may be. I will say optional here, because that's optional. I'm going to deselect the required box, and I'm going to go down to short answer question. Our next question here is going to be time. So what time did the incident start? Bang. And there we go. Our option down there is going to be time. Our last question type here is actually a bit of a special category because it's not strictly a question. If we click and choose static text, any option we choose static text, it's not actually going to ask a question. It's just going to display whatever text it is that we add in the question field. So I'm just going to write here, for example, if there was physical injury, remember a internal incident report must be completed. That's just information that I want them to have. I'm not actually asking for any data there. And with all of that done, the last question here is about an email alert. This, if I check this box here, I will be sent an email every time this form is completed. This can be really handy, for example, if we have a special form for physical injury or the use of physical restraint or administering a PRN. Anytime I want to be actively notified, this can be really helpful. I don't need to be notified every time Johnny engages in physical aggression though, so I'm going to leave that unchecked and I'm going to click on Save. So now that we've put that all together, we've created our first form. Let's check it out and see what it looks like. Here we have, this is the shift report that we started completing earlier, but we couldn't complete it. So if I click directly on that, it's going to take me right to the form. Here is our question. We click add new, physical injury. Oh, look at this. No, we could choose to take a photo with that button. Here is what the sliding scale looks like. Here is where we can choose from the multi-choice there. And we can also add new things there. So let's see what this looks like. Johnny bit his own hand. Click on plus there. That's now an option. How long did the incident last? Let's say 30 minutes. We could put our notes there and we can add a time option there. I have to say though, the order of these questions is not making any sense at all right now. So let's see if we can fix that. If we go back to the form, click on the physical aggression form, here we can reorder all of these so this makes sense. So let's, first question we want to ask is what time did it happen? Then we can ask the severity, maybe duration in between time and severity. Was injury caused? Was there a photo? And then I want to remind people behaviors. Let's put that after severity, and notes optionally. Let's put that at the end. Now let's see what this looks like again. Look at that. It is ordered how we want it to be. And one thing we'll also see here is for the questions we marked as mandatory or required, we're going to have a star there to indicate that. Whereas for non-mandatory questions, it's just going to look like that. So that looks really good. I'm really pleased with that. Let's add another form. What we'll notice here is that since we clicked the physical aggression to be saved as a template, that now appears here, and that'll appear for other clients as well, saved to our account. So that's a handy thing to know. But let's add something. Let's add a seizure form. This time, all of the questions are already answered. for us, and they're already pre-filled out according to what I consider to be sensible defaults. But that doesn't mean you can still edit all of these, and that can be handy. But let's click save on that, and I'm happy with that. And let's add one more default form. Let's add PRN chemical restraint. Let's stick with all of those defaults again there, just for the purposes of this tutorial. So that is all looking good. Let's see what other tabs we've got here. We've also got a setup tab. So let's see what that does. This, similar to how we reordered the questions before, this allows us to reorder these questions, to put them in a sensible order. So I want to ask about seizures first, then physical aggression, then PR and chemical restraint. Something that this form allows us to do that the other form didn't do is to nest the forms inside the other. So I can drag chemical restraint to be part of physical aggression. For example, if the only time PRN chemical restraint should be administered or would be administered for Johnny is if he engages in physical aggression, then I can add that there, and then I can add as many inside that as I like. I can do whatever I like with that. So now when we go to answer a question about physical aggression, bang, that question about PRN chemical restraint is going to appear in there, and I can start to answer that there straight away. And I could also, for example, I could answer this question multiple times if multiple PRNs were administered during this one escalation. And then with that done, the only last thing we need to look at, similarly to before, is how to edit a form, and we could also delete. Once again, permanent, we want to be careful there. The final thing I lied to look at here is the default tab. The default tab is a form, much the same as any other form, but this is a collection of questions that are going to be asked every single shift as default. So a lot of these fields cannot be edited because we cannot edit these fields of the default form. But let's say we want a question like mood. How was Johnny's mood? Where 1 is terrible and 5 is great. I want this to be a linear scale, and I want it to be between 1 and 5. I'm happy with that. I'm going to click save there. And now if we go and look at, if we create it, let's create a new form for Johnny. Let's complete something for the afternoon shift. Afternoon, create. Now we see these questions are going to appear in the base level form here. And that essentially is everything that we need to know about creating forms for Johnny.